Well, I went to a Bible study group at my local church on Tuesday, 2 days ago. And I'd been planning to go for a while, but for twice consecutively I was unable to attend. And it's only held once every 2 weeks. For some reason, I didn't know there was a Bible study at the church. And when I found out, I thought I'd go along to it without really giving the matter any great thought. But perhaps I should have thought about it more deeply, or sometimes they say pray about it. But I'm not a fan of that. Um, I feel like I've always got a kind of a dialogue going on in my mind, and I'm always reading the Bible. So when an idea comes into my mind, I tend to think it's sent by the Lord, although I might not immediately, you know, think about that aspect. I'm not a fan of the pray about it because the church that I used to attend, the vicar or the preacher would always say, "I'll pray about it," and when he didn't want to do something, and if you asked him a question and it probably wasn't in line with his views, what he wanted to do, instead of saying no, he would say, "I'll pray about it," and then never get back to me. And I saw evidence of this not just with myself. Um, you know, you know what to do. You know what you want to do. You've got the Bible, and then you make your choice, I suppose. So I assume that it was the Lord that had persuaded me to go along to this meeting, I suppose. And when I got there, and it wasn't an optimal arrival because I was late. I hate being late for things like that. I think it's disrespectful. But having attempted to go twice in succession, it's only every 2 weeks, and I'd said to somebody else that I would go. And then on the Tuesday, I was working, and I had overstayed my time at home, and I couldn't really get there except late. But I decided to go anyway. And so off I went, and it was a rainy day. And when I got in there, I made my apologies and sat down. And there were one, two, three, four, I think four women, or possibly, no, I think four women, and the fellow who was who was conducting it. And I recognized him as being somebody that I'd encountered a couple of, at least a year ago, when I resolved to um, hire a room at the church so I could speak about the authorized version of the Bible. And I had to make an application. I asked the vicar, who was a woman at that time, and I promised that all I was going to do was to examine the language and not get into any deep theology, because of course it would have been, you can't do that in a church. You're just seen as being a nuisance person. So I said that, and I think as long as it was a commercial gesture, then it was allowed, and he would have been involved in allowing it because he's one of the trustees, this fellow. But after I'd made the application, he came up to me the first time I've spoken to him and told me quite confidently that it wouldn't be popular. Nobody would come, he said, because nobody's interested in that Bible. It's out of date, he told me. So there was I sitting in his Bible class, and I didn't know it was going to be him leading it, but there he was, and I'm sure he recognized me, and I had my authorized version with me, of course. And I think he was reading from the New International Version, and there were several Good News Bibles on the table. And when it came to where are we, I turned to Acts chapter 4, starting from verse 25, although I'm sure that they'd already read the first part of the chapter. And the first point that the person who was taking this elder, the first point that he raised was that there was there were four mentions of the word servant in the passage, and that we were servants of God, and how these people were always described as being servants. Now I looked in my authorized version and I could only find two. The first one is referred to David, and the second one is referred to the apostles. And so I became curious, and I realized that the other two, in our Bible, the word is the holy child of God, but in the NIV, it's the holy servant of God. And so I simply pointed it out. I didn't attempt to make any theological point about it. I just said, in the authorized version here, in two cases, it says holy child of God rather than holy servant. The NIV does give the word holy, but it uses it to describe Jesus Christ in those two cases. Jesus Christ, the holy servant of God. And I think that's quite a serious error, to describe Jesus Christ as a servant of God, because he is the Son of God and indeed co-equal with the Father, and he is indeed God at the same time. I think it's quite disrespectful to describe him as a servant of God. It shows a lack of understanding of his identity, I would say. I mean, I didn't get into any of these points at the Bible study, but I thought about them later. The fact that you're holding a Bible study and reading from a corrupt manuscript is already, I suppose, a red flag. But I like to speak about the Bible, and I thought it would be an interesting thing to go to and attend. And there I was. But then, after about 10 minutes, they started. The gentleman said that they would start the prayer part of the meeting. Now, I didn't know it was also going to be a prayer meeting. Otherwise, I might have been more mindful before attending, because I don't really agree with the theology at all that's practiced in that church. But I was there, and so, I listened to the first prayer that the gentleman himself prayed. And he prayed over the terrible things that are going on in the world, and the difficult times that the world seems to be going through, and this, that, and the other. And you could, I suppose, cynically, I thought to myself, well, it sounded as though he was almost reading from a left-wing newspaper in some parts of his prayer. But that could be a bit harsh, but it was fairly, although he didn't mention the culprits of the problems that are happening, I think he knew who he was speaking about, or which countries, or which individuals. I got that impression. And then he spoke another prayer, which surprised me in its nature, because in that prayer he spoke about the grace of God and salvation, and said that he didn't know why and how it worked, and he didn't want to know. He just accepted it as it was, and I found that odd, not to want to know, because I would definitely like to know as much as possible. The idea that you would pray for darkness, really, or ignorance, seemed to me to be a mismatch. I didn't like that part of it at all. But there was a lady there who was also joining in with her prayers. She was quite difficult to hear because she mumbles, and my hearing isn't as acute as it might be. And she's a lay preacher, and I'd also crossed swords with her a little bit, because one of the things that became clear when I started attending the weekly coffee morning or lunch, just to meet people, really, I'd made it clear that I was rather surprised that there was a woman vicar in the church. I said, it doesn't really line up with scripture now, does it? And of course, this met with um, consternation and a level of hostility because, well, the preacher herself, being a woman, and there are two lay preachers, they're both women. And I think this elder also takes the pulpit from time to time. But I didn't feel that I could go into a church with a woman preacher because to me it seems wrong to have to bow my head before a woman. And I'm not just basing it on Paul, I'm going right back to Adam and Eve with this idea. It's dangerous. And women are not ordained to teach men. Only Deborah bucked that trend, I suppose, but she was only there because there was no man who would do the job. And she did it apologetically, really. So we had regular prayers from this woman who seems to know the Bible quite well, and she knew what to say, but she didn't really, to me, it didn't sound as though her heart was in it. She was simply being the top of the class, as it were, and showing that she was in the same category as the elder who was leading the group. That might be slightly uncharitable definition, I mean, she's very nice. I've chatted to her on a few occasions, but that was just my impression, shall we say. So when there was a long silence, I thought, well, I'll give a word of prayer, and I prayed a very short prayer, thanking the Lord for the rain which we've had recently, and for the many blessings that He sends. And I kept it very quick. And then there was a final prayer by this gentleman, quite long prayers, and nobody else spoke, and the meeting came to an end. And I said, oh, well, now it's time for a cup of tea. And the elder who was leading the meeting said that it's time for him to wash the dishes, which is what he does every week. He spends 2 or 3 hours in the kitchen washing dishes as part of the voluntary work while they prepare all this food for local people who can afford to buy their own food. They sell it at very low cost, very low prices. And the profits that they make, they send to these registered charities, which I'm very, very dubious about. I think they're organizations of the greatest wickedness, actually. But, the money would get sent off, I suppose, to the Ukraine recently. I don't know where they're sending it now, but it'll be some place recommended by the mainstream media and, supported by some charity or other, or some missionary. And they send a few £100, perhaps, off to that. I don't support those gifts at all. I'm against them. I would rather the money went to the people who prepared the food. And I actually mentioned to the current vicar of that church, who is a man, that why weren't these people paid? And I said, unpaid labor is called slavery. And everybody laughed because they did hear me in the kitchen. I was only, I suppose, joking, really, but there was a measure of truth in what I was saying. These are people who work very hard and quite long hours every time. Once a week, the sort of breakfast and lunch thing is held, and they receive no monetary remuneration for what they do. They do it out of a sense of Christian faith, I think. But I see it more as being works. That's just my own perspective on it. I don't need to have a low-cost lunch. I'd be happy to pay for it. And most of the people that attend there are very capable of paying. Some of them are really wealthy. So, and I don't want my money being sent to a charity, but that's just the way that it is, I wouldn't mind helping the upkeep of the church or something, but I don't believe in those charities. So at the end of the meeting, I thought, well, I'm not going to go to that again. I chatted to one of the women who had been there, the only person remaining who I could speak to, and I said that I'd felt, that I felt offended, and I was mainly referring to the incorrect translation in the New International Version. I didn't really mention the prayers of the elder, but perhaps I found that more offensive, that one would pray for darkness or for obscurity of understanding rather than to search out the deeper meanings of Scripture. So whether I'll go next week or not, in 2 weeks' time, I think I ought to, really, because and I'll make sure I get there on time. Who knows? I don't want to be seen as a troublemaker. This is the problem in church. When you start bringing slightly different ideas, you are immediately treated with suspicion, and then they'll accuse you of sowing discord among the faithful. They can accuse you of that. So you're treading on quite thin ice if anything that you say is critical of the views that they do hold. And almost everything that I could say is critical. I'm sure that the elder who was holding the meeting wasn't pleased to hear me pipe up and point out a discrepancy with respect to the Authorized Version. Perhaps he was expecting it. But I didn't labour the point at all. As I said, I'm not there to cause upset. But I can't stay silent on certain points. And I think the error in the New International Version in that particular point is quite serious. I mean, I think the New International Version is full of serious errors when people mess around with Scripture. There's a lack of belief. This is the problem. If you don't know that the Bible is true, and to know that, you have to know what the Bible is, then really you don't trust it. Once you understand that the Bible is true, in not just as a general recommendation here and there, and certain passages that you like more than others, but that the whole Bible is the truth. And so we have an obligation and a duty to study it and to understand the truth. I mean, if you don't know that, then of course you can use, in a formal setting like that, you can use adulterated documents written by non-believers, because the people in the committee, the translators committee for the NIV, were drawn deliberately, really, from different areas and different beliefs, because there's this idea of humanism has crept into the church. And I was told that there was one of the women on the committee was a lesbian. I don't know whether that's true or not. I haven't bothered to research it, but it wouldn't surprise me at all. The learned men were in quite a different category. They were blessed by God, and the choosing of them had been blessed by God. And they were a mixed bunch, and that was exactly what we needed. They were a mixed bunch in the sense that they represented both sides, the formal, the kingly approach, and the popular approach of the Puritans. And it was the whole idea of the Authorized Version of the Bible was to bring those two extremes together. And, I think it's succeeded, because, of course, the Bible has endured and, will never be superseded, although many have attempted to write a better one. There is no better one. I don't think it means that you have to read that one, because it's quite tricky in places, and you might prefer to read a more accessible version. But you do have to remember that that's the benchmark. So you might want to go and check from time to time and have it in the house. Certainly, try reading through it. the Lord will open it up, I'm sure, to anybody who approaches it. But if your reading level is more sort of Good News Bible and stuff like that, I don't think that's a huge problem. You just need to remember that you're not reading the original Bible, and so there is room for error. That's what I would say. So anyway, I think I will go back in 2 weeks' time and try to sit on my hands and to keep my mouth shut as far as possible. And maybe it is useful for me to be there. If the Lord has put me there, then there must be a reason for it. God bless everybody this afternoon.